First part of session 76 and the first session of book 4. Let's talk here very appropriately about the archetypical mind. Let's begin. Now, I say very appropriately because most people know that book 4 of the raw material is mostly about the archetypical mind, or maybe the study of the archetypical mind is what permeates most of the topics in book 4. I would even say that book 1 was more general stuff about the creation and getting to get a taste of Ra. The second book was a little bit more into specific details. It actually started the whole creation process, the three distortions, the first primal distortions of the law of one. We got into Kundalini and a bunch of other stuff. Book 3 started to be a little bit more in detail and, on the mystical side and more refined than book 4. It seems to be mostly about this, the intensity of the study of the self in terms of everything that they have been constructing up to here. So I want to start this session, this book, with a disclaimer, caveat, whatever you want to call it, that I'm not a student of the archetypical minds, of the Tarot itself. I wasn't attracted at the beginning when I read it. As I kept reading it, it sort of became something interesting, but I realized, as everybody does, that the study of the archetypical mind is something that is very complex, profound, deep. It's not something that you can understand just by reading the book, let alone just listening to me, or even people have tried to explain the archetypical mind, and it is, like I said, a very fascinating but very deep study. So my disclaimer is that I don't study it. I read about it. I think there are interesting things, but inside me there is not a drive, an impetus to move towards the study of the archetypical mind and to understand it and all of this. So to me, this is going to be just a sort of talking about it. I do understand the aspects of the archetypical mind. I patch it my own way, which is what we're really supposed to do. You see, that's another thing. So bear with me with this introduction because it's important. The study of the archetypical mind, in any case, especially of the Tarot, is all about understanding the mechanisms and then interpreting them somehow, depending on how you want to see it, because it's you, it's acting through you, and so how do you interpret it is important. That's what Ra gave here, and you will see that Ra sort of emphasized a couple of times at the beginning that they were not here to tell you how the archetypical mind worked and to interpret the Tarot and all of this, which is a method of study of the archetypical mind, as we'll see here. But there is the warning that there is no proper way to study it. You see, even though we can point at specific mechanisms of what's happening in the mind, and so just my level of understanding is it's not at all as an instructor of Tarot or archetypical mind. So what you'll get from me is just the overall general view, which is, again, it's meant to incite you to study it if you want, but that's it. Now, the other thing is that I think it's important to mention that the study of the archetypical mind is not important, it's not relevant to self-realization, which is the one thing that Ra is interested in the long run with the law of one, and that I am interested as a sort of passionate person that talks about the one self. So this is just to say that at this point, because we're reading the Law of One, we're studying the Law of One, we may think, oh, this is it. The archetypical mind is the pinnacle of the study of the Law of One. And this is not so. This is, if you want to understand the mind, and it is a fascinating study, like I said. So if you want to specialize in the mind, then that's something that you need to look into, because that is the structure, the blueprint of the mind. However, if you don't care about the mind and you only care about reality, the true self, then you don't need this. You see, in fact, you don't need this at all. You don't need anything, to be honest. But it's I just don't want to say that forget about the archetypical mind, but I also don't want to say it's very important that you study the archetypical mind. It's your choice, how you feel, and after that, it's just how you want to explore it. But it's not needed, and it's also not discouraged. I think that's all I wanted to say. I think I wanted to say something else, but it escaped my mind. Mostly, that's all I wanted to talk about before we get into a long study. This is going to take me a whole year to finish book 4, as it has been before with the other books. So we're going to go little by little. I'll try to contribute as much as I can with this study in and of itself. And again, I just want you to be in the middle. There is no need to study the archetypical mind, and at the same time, I'm not discouraging it. It is really up to you. And maybe this will show you the complexity of it, so you get fascinated with, or simply just as a bystander. Just watch, say, that's cool, and all. I'll quote Bodhidharma, who is the first patriarch of Zen, who said, if you want to understand reality with your mind, you won't understand either. If you want to understand reality without your mind, you will understand both. Or something like that. I probably butchered the the quote, but in any case, Bodhidharma simply said that you can't understand reality with your mind. So don't try it, because you won't understand your mind or reality. But if you do study reality without the mind, then you will understand both. So I'll leave you that for chewing as we get into the first question of this session with my long introduction. So let's go. First question is done as usual, saying, could you first please give me an indication of the condition of the instrument? Ra says, this instrument is in a state of physical complex bankruptcy, which has existed for some of the measure you call time. The vital energies are normal, with a strong spiritual complex counterpart, and will lending substance to the mind, body, spirit complex energy levels. It's a very strange read there. The vital energies are normal, with a strong spiritual complex and counterpart. A strong spiritual complex counterpart, and will lending substance to the mind, body, spirit complex. So the spiritual complex counterpart and the will were lending substance to the vital energies. So what's happening here again? Interestingly, session 75 ended in October of 1981. This session is from February 3rd, I think, of 1982, the year I was born. What happened last time, we knew that Carla was going to surgery, her hand. So I suppose there was a time of rest for her. And 3 months later, right? January, December, November, and a little bit of October. That's the time they took from session 75 to 76. Another thing to mention here is that they did 75 sessions in 9 months. Let's call it 10. Let's round it up to 10. So they did 75 sessions in 10 months. The next 20 sessions or so are going to be in 1981, I think. So you can see how it started gradually eroding them in many aspects. So it's one of those things that we normally don't pay attention when we read the Law of One, but yeah, so far it hasn't even been, actually, 75 sessions in less than a year. So back to the question. Carla was in a physical complex bankruptcy. I love the word bankruptcy there. She had very little physical energy, and it has been for a while. As Ra says it, the vital energies are drawing from the spiritual complex and the will, so she can keep on living. So Don asks in the next question, will our continued communication with Ra be deleterious to the physical energies of the instrument? Ra says, we may answer in two modes. Firstly, if the instrument were thusly dedicated to this use with no transfer of energy of physical complex nature, it would begin to call upon the vital energy itself, and this, done in any substantive measure, is actively deleterious to a mind-body-spirit complex if that complex wishes further experience in the illusion which it now distorts. So they're going to answer in two modes. The first one is this, that if Carla was completely dedicated, right, without transfer of energy, which is the physical and the sexual, then the physical, non-sexual, and mental transfer and so on, then what would happen is, so we have physical energy, right? That's what we associate with our body, and our body draws this from many activities. This is why diet and exercise, funny enough, that's what Ra used to tell Carla. We'll get more into her diet later on, but Ra suggested certain items that she could eat, physical exercise to a degree, massage, and all this stuff. This is the type of care that we need to have for our bodies. So that's the physical energy transfer from sexual, and I think they get into magical transfer too. That's another thing. Exercise of fire comes to mind, which again, I don't know it, but the trio used to do it. So without the physical complex energy, Carla would start calling upon this vital energy, which is drawn from the spiritual complex and the will, as Ra was saying. Eventually, this will kill her, basically. That's what Ra is saying. This done in any substantive measure will basically erode her to Ra just says, is actively deleterious to a mind-body-spirit complex if that complex wishes further experience in the illusion which it now distorts. The illusion that she now distorts is third density. So if the mind-body-spirit complex wishes to... See, it's funny. You think Ra is talking in a very complicated way. Why do they do that? See, the thing is that they're not talking about a person here. The person will die. The person will go. And this is just, I'm going to call it interdimensional view of what's happening here. Third density is a happening we think is people doing things. It's not. It's almost like nature. You see, nature does the tree, but the tree is not nature. It is part of nature, but it is not nature. We cannot say this tree represents nature. No, it's a part of nature. It's not necessary for nature, yet it happens. So the way they see this is that, for example, I know I'm being a little bit fastidious with the words here, but pay attention to this. When they say that a mind-body-spirit complex will be deleterious to that mind-body-spirit complex if that complex wishes further experience in the illusion, which is third density. The mind-body-spirit complex is intact. Nothing happens to it. But if it wishes more experience in third density, it must maintain the homeostasis that is needed. Metaphysical homeostasis, let's call it that. It's not even metaphysical, it's a whole homeostasis that must be preserved. So if it doesn't, it doesn't, and it goes away from the illusion of third density, but it maintains itself. So you see, there's not a person there. And to me, that's important. This is, like I said, the metaphysical or interdimensional view, non-dual view. And I love it, of course. So, secondly, they say, if care is taken, firstly, to monitor the outer parameters of the instrument, then to transfer physical energy by sexual transfer, by magical protection, and lastly, by the energetic displacements of thought forms, energizing the instrument during contact, there is no difficulty in that. There is no worsening of the instrument's mind, body, spirit, complex distortions of strength, weakness. So if all of this is taken care of, then she wouldn't suffer the consequences of draining herself. So what are these? Transfer physical energy by sexual transfer, by magical protection, and lastly, by the energetic displacements of thought forms, energizing the instrument during contact. So let's go reverse. The energetic displacement of thought forms energizing the instrument during contact, to me, is that there's a couple of things. They wanted to, in their environment, they had Orion and they had Confederation. Let me just put it that way, or positive and negative energies. Those two, they needed to be well balanced, right? You need not reject the negative, but accept them as they are. And you want to draw from the positive help that is being offered to the instrument, to Carla in this case. Then by magical protection, I believe that's all the rituals they did. And sexual energy transfer, that was Jim and Carla doing this. So it's basically Jim's energy that he was. Remember, sexual energy transfer, when it's from male to female, and it's debatable if this is biological male to biological female, but it seems to be reasonable to believe that it is the predominant energy that the person has. So it could be homosexual energy transfer, sexual energy transfer, but there is obviously a difference in which energy is, expressed more by one person, whether it's masculine or feminine. So, but in this case, in both, it could be also heterosexual, and the female does more the physical because she's more masculine, and the man, the biological man, being more feminine, then that would be the transfer. If this is correct, that's just two possibilities. I don't know which one is true. I just know that both are thrown into the mix. So whatever resonates with you, I guess. But in both cases here, Jim was definitely the masculine, not only biologically, but mentally and everything. He was the one transferring physical energy through sexual transfer. So these are the things that needed to be taken care of, and then Carla wouldn't suffer the consequences of worsening the physical complex distortions towards strength weakness. Last part of Ra. They say, it is to be noted that the instrument, by dedicating itself to this service, attracts greetings of which you are aware. These are inconvenient, but with care taken, need not be lastingly deleterious either to the instrument or the contact. So yeah, lastly, that she was attracting negative entities, and those they just needed to take care of as usual, and they did. So not much to say here. Let's move on to question 3. Don says, of the 3 things you mentioned that we could do for the instrument's benefit, would you clarify the last one? I didn't quite understand that. Ra says, as the entity which you are allows its being to empathize with another being, So then it may choose to share with other self those energies which may be salubrious to the other self. The mechanism of these energy transfers is the thought, or more precisely, the thought form of any thought. For any thought is a form or symbol or thing that is an object seen in time-space reference. It's actually a pretty good answer here. I think I misinterpreted the last one. There is no difficulty in, right? Yeah, I think the last one, the energetic displacements of thought forms energizing the instrument during contact. So never mind the balancing of negative and positive energies, although I would think they would have an effect, but Ra's talking about here, as they clarify to Don, that this is the positive thoughts that were created by Don and Jim, especially Jim during contact, because Jim used to just sit there. If you don't know what was happening during the contact, Don was sitting there and asking the questions, Carla was in trance, and Jim was sitting next to her, meditating, sending her love lights or positive thoughts, or just energizing her through his mind, right? So mostly Jim, I guess in this case, that's what maintains part of the contact, right? And that's what Ra was talking about before with the last. So as long as they kept doing that, it was fine. You see, this is the same element as when you wish, when we say sending you love and light, that's exactly what it is. Which of course now is a sort of, what's it called? I forget the word. But yeah, it's a common phrase, right? Sending you love and light. But truly, when you do this, when you think about somebody and you feel them, like for example, right now, one of my friends is going through a very tough situation, and whenever I can think about her and feel her pain right now, I know this is happening because you're empathizing. That's what Ra is saying. When you empathize with another being, so then it may choose to share with the other self those energies which may be salubrious to the other self. So basically, good vibes, that's another thing. Those good vibes are usually, I can't help but laugh because I hear it all the time. Good vibes to you. But that's it. If the person says it with their heart, then they are sending that. The mechanisms of these energy transfers is the thought, or more precisely, the thought form. So that's the mechanism of this energy transfer, the thought. Because any thought is a form, as Ra says, or symbol, or thing that is an object seen in time-space reference. Now, if you think that this is all pseudoscience and all this stuff, and which I know you don't, but if there is a thought in the back of your head, a Hintergedanken, you will say, well, how do I know that's true? Well, Dr. Emoto, Japanese researcher, you may know it because of his research with water and thoughts and words and things like that. These water samples are impressed only with thought or an emotion, and when frozen, they depict the emotion. Well, how is it depicted? When it's positive emotions, crystallized, beautiful geometrical patterns. When it is a negative or a negative emotion, or some what's the word? Aggressive thoughts. That's the word. When it is aggressive thought, and that's why he even played metal to the water. And when frozen, the patterns were completely. There were no patterns. There was just as much. Is that a word? It was like a blur of something. Go check it out. Emoto, like emote, but Emoto, Dr. Emoto. I forget his last name. So yes, these things are real. Thoughts are real things that affect reality. So when they're good, when they're positive, when they're well-intentioned, they do serve to help the other person to be more salubrious or healthful or healthy. But let's move on. Question 4. Don says, has our use of the banishing ritual of the lesser pentagram been of any value? I have issues with that word. And what is its effect? The pentagram. Banishing ritual of the lesser pentagram. Ra says, this group's use of the banishing ritual of the lesser pentagram has been increasingly efficacious. Its effect is purification, cleansing, and protection of the place of working. The efficacy of this ritual is only beginning to be, shall we say, at the lower limits of the truly magical. In doing the working, those aspiring to adepthood have done the equivalent of beginning the schoolwork many grades ahead. So, let me reread this. Again, the banishing ritual was something that they did for cleansing the room before the raw contact, I believe, every time. And its effect of purification, cleansing, and protection, that efficacy is only beginning to be at the lower limits of the truly magical. So, yeah, no matter how much they practice it and did it, I mean, that's a very, I don't want to use the word discouraging, but again, the efficacy of this ritual is only beginning to be at the lower limits of the truly magical. So you can just imagine the amount of work that it requires for you to do this type of magical. I suppose it depends also, because it's not the same as, I don't know, Tibetan monks doing their rituals, which, let's face it, they're a lot more balanced people than Don, Carla, and Jim. No offense, they knew it also. They consider themselves to be normal people just looking for information, and they so happened to encounter Ra. So, again, they weren't monks, they weren't people dedicated all their lives to this, right? And they didn't even know much about non-duality or enlightenment or any of this. You can note this by the interest of the questions that they asked. They were purely mechanical about the processes, and that's why we get the raw material as it is. There was very little. You can see that Don, and again, this is not a criticism, but just an observation, that Don was very mechanical. He was all about, knowing what are the steps for me to do this or help people. The intention is always the same, of course. It's always service to others. But that view of the world or the universe as mechanical has its limitations, and those limitations will grind you see. So again, I don't wish this to sound judgmental at all, but it's just the true observation of what happened. So the rituals, as they perform it, well-intentioned and everything, they were limited by their own mind complexes at the time. I'm sure over time it became much more effective. Because you can see this in Jim and Carla. As they progressed, they became a lot more mystical people. But these were the beginnings for them, actually. They were just curious people at this time. So in any case, they're saying in doing the working, those aspiring to adepthood have done the equivalent of beginning the schoolwork many grades ahead. So a lot to be learned, basically. But Ross says also, for the intelligent student, this is not to be discouraged. Rather, to be encouraged is the homework, the reading, the writing, the arithmetic, as you might metaphorically call the elementary steps towards the study of being. It is the being that informs the working, not the working that informs the being. Therefore, we may leave you to the work you have begun. Boof. Yes, yes, yes. This is it. This is the answer. You see? So I did use the word discouraging, and I didn't even know it was here. But Ra even says it here, right? It is not to be discouraging, but rather to be encouraged to do the work, the homework. So what is the beauty in this paragraph when they say, it is the being that informs the working, not the working that informs the being. Oh my God, yes. People who love Ra and the way they express things, these are the phrases that are infinitely substantious, you see, because hidden here is being, not doing, you see, in the sense of you're not here to do things, you're here to be, see. And the more you get in touch with being, the more you can be, the less you need to do, although doing is a natural consequence of being, if that makes sense, you see. So we are too emphasized with doing, action, performing, accomplishing, succeeding. See, all of this is involved in the activity, whereas being is left in the background. Now, you fear that if you stop doing, right, if you stop spinning this wheel, which is the wheel of life, you may stop being. But that is not true. And this comes with a lot of fears of, what if I stop being who I am? Well, try it. Try stop being. You can't. It's not possible. So being precedes doing. Now, because we know that there is a never-ending activity of being, we think that we must be doing, and so we try to get ahead of ourselves. The mind takes control, or gets the illusion of control, which is clearly depicted with the kid next to his dad in the car playing with the steering wheel, the toy steering wheel. You think you're in control because you move it, and sometimes the car moves the way you seem to predict too. And you think like, oh, I've learned that if I steer this way, when I see this, it may happen. But maybe your dad didn't turn there, and you say, well, what happened there? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that is the emphasis of doing. So Ra says, it is the being that informs the working. You see, yes, you are doing things, and your being is that informs what you're doing. And sometimes you say, well, this is not for me, and it's not for you. That's it. You should be happy with that. Or, this is for me. I love it. I feel somehow I can't intellectualize how I feel, but I love it. You see, I just love doing this. And this translates off, obviously, to magical and everything else, which is, just bear in mind that Don, Carla, and Jim were doing this not because they were interested in writing a book, not because they were interested in becoming famous, or because they thought it was their duty, because some celestial being told them. No, they did this because they wanted to learn. They wanted to learn the ways of the law of one. They were attracted to the law of one. What is the law of one? You are one. Stop seeking. Stop the seeking. You are one. But if you must persist in the seeking, well, here is the material. You see? You only need material if you think you need to learn. If you don't think you need to learn, then you don't need anything. So, because they were in this process, the working was informing their being. And yes, it's oh my God, it's just perfect, beautiful. And so Ra says at the end, therefore, we may leave you to the work you have begun. It's just perfect. I love it. I love mystical Ra. But let's move on. Question 5, Don says, would it be beneficial for us to perform the banishing ritual more in this room? Ra says, it is beneficial to regularly work in this place. So they don't tell you what to do, but they just say, yeah, it's beneficial to do, and do it here. It's your decision, as always. Question 6, Don says, sorry we had such a long delay between the last session and this one. It couldn't be helped, I guess. Could you please tell me the origin of the tarot? Yeah, here we go. Ra says the origin of this system of study and divination is twofold. Firstly, there is that influence which, coming in a distorted fashion from those who were priests attempting to teach the law of one in Egypt, gave form to the understanding, if you will pardon the misnomer, which they had received. These forms were then made a regular portion of the learned teachings of an initiate. So let me stop there. Just emphasize that Don mentioned, sorry it took us this long, 3 months, as if Ra cared. They were waiting for you. No. But again, it's just Don's way of thinking. And again, those are the 3 and somewhat months that they took, right? So now the origin of the tarot, that's what starts this whole thing. Now, Ra's gonna give a long answer here. The origin of this system of study and divination is twofold. Well, the first one is that the tarot was given as a sort of, as we'll see, a method of study of the archetypical mind, right? And this was given to the priests in Egypt when they were attempting to learn the law of one. So they created the tarot. That's very important. They basically design the cards. See, coming in a distorted fashion, they gave form to the understanding, if you pardon the misnomer. Remember, Ra has issues with the word understanding, just so you can see how thorough they are, because, I mean, I have issues also with their issue, because I use the word understanding within the law of one. But they don't like it because they refer to the true understanding, which is the true seeing. It's almost like saying, oh, I can see your mind. You know, you don't truly see other people's mind. You basically get a grasp, a faint idea of their minds. But we do say, I see your mind. You're not seeing it. So in the same way, when we say, I understand, no, you don't. You grasp a little bit. You kind of get a whiff of the scent, but not the full. You know, you don't get the scent. That's a probably bad analogy, but you get the point. So yeah, that they say a lot too. These forms were then made a regular portion of the learned teachings of an initiate, which was the tarot. Now, the second influence is that of those entities in the lands you call Chaldea, and Mesopotamia, who from old had received the, shall we say, data from which they called having to do with the heavens. Thusly, we find 2 methods of divination being melded into one with uneven results. The, as you call it, astrology, and the form being combined to suggest what you might call the correspondences, which are typical of the distortions you may see as attempts to view archetypes. So, interesting. The second influence of the tarot was those of Chaldea and Mesopotamia, basically those who created astrology or worked with astrology. Astrology, another method of divination. And they both were melded. That's why there is astrological meanings, and you will see this as we get into the study of the tarot here in the Law of One. There is there's a lot of influence of astrological stuff, and from that, Ra mentions a lot of times that is from an astrological origin, so you can basically take it out of the equation if you want. So these combine. It's interesting that they say we find those two methods of divination being melded into one with uneven results. Maybe that's the reason why they sometimes, when they're studying the tarot with Don, they say you may take out, that astrological influence. I forget what they say specifically. You may release it from its stricture, they say, because it's from astrological origin. All right, so astrology and the form being combined to suggest that what you might call the correspondences, which are typical of the distortions you may see as attempts to view archetypes. So these are, again, we're getting into the very specific, say, imprint into the tarot from the attempts to understand the archetypes. You see, that's reflected right there in that phrase. These things being combined, the tarot from Egypt and astrology from these areas, when combined to suggest what we may call correspondences, so relationships between the archetypes and what they depict. Very interesting. So, all right, this starts the conversation. Let's move on with question 7. Don says, then am I correct in assuming that the priests in Egypt, in attempting to convert knowledge that they had received initially from Ra into understandable symbology, constructed and initiated the concept of the tarot? Is this correct? Ra says this is correct with the addition of the Sumerian influence. So, something else there. Question 8, Don says, were Ra's teaching focusing on the archetypes for this logos and the methods of achieving a very close approach to the archetypical configuration? Is this correct? Ra says this is correct without being true. We of Ra are humble messengers of the law of one. Only Ra can get away with this. This is correct without being true. Let's take a moment to digest that. All right. Mom and done. We of Ra are humble messengers of the law of one. We seek to learn the single law. During the space-time of the Egyptian learning, we work to bring the mind complex, the body complex, and the spirit complex into an initiated state in which the entity could contact intelligent energy, and so become learner itself, that healing and the fruits of study could be offered to all. So, it's correct, but not true. You see, it's so the correctness is that I just love it. Oh my God, I enjoy this so much. So it is correct that Ra's teaching were focusing on the archetypes for this logos. That is right. I mean, so far it is true. They didn't focus on archetypes for another logos. That doesn't make sense. It's another blueprint for another mind that we're not related to. And the methods of achieving a very close approach to the archetypical configuration. Maybe that's the untrue part. I can't get enough of that. This is correct without being true. I don't know why I get such a kick out of this. I'm a nerd, I suppose. I know you're laughing with me, even if it's inside. I know the corner of your mouth is tilted upwards at this point, at least. Love it. Anyhow, all right, time to get serious. I can't get serious. It just happens to me. You start laughing and can't stop. All right, so what we do see here is that I mean, there is a more specific answer from Ra here when they say that I think the untrue part is maybe the methods of achieving a very close approach to the archetypical configuration. I'm just going to go on a tangent here and say that Don, with his mechanical mind, which I already mentioned, says this, you're trying to get, he's saying to Ra, so your teachings were focusing on the archetypes for this logos. I think that's completely true. That is absolutely true. And the methods of achieving, here's where it's not true, I believe. The methods of achieving a very close approach to the archetypical configuration. I don't think these are the methods of achieving a very close approach to archetypical configuration. There are probably infinite ways, right? So Ra says, just as a caveat here, we of Ra are humble messengers of the law of one. Whenever they say this in the material, there's always the possibility prior in the question that Ra may be seen as, you have the key. And Ra always says, no, 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 no. We are humble messengers of that key. We have used it and have been successful to a degree, so here, we can talk about it. You see, it's almost like saying, oh, you are an enlightened person. You know who you are. Can you please give me the key? And you say, no, I can't. I can only talk about it. And that's what I do. You see? So, without it, take away the enlightened person, because that's just a very, such a distorted, in the pure sense of the word, distorted view of what enlightenment is, which is something that I talk about too. Enlightenment is not something reserved for mystical people, and well, it is reserved for mystical people, but it's not for somebody who needs to spend X amount of time. You don't need to go through an arduous process. The arduous process happens with or without enlightenment, so it's up to you if you want to know who you are, to go through the process, the arduous process of life. Only that you go with a smile instead of a frown. A grin and not a frown. In any case, so I think Ra is invoking this again to say, hey, we're humble messengers of the Law of One. We don't know. We can't give the key. We don't do that. You see, we seek to learn the single law. What is the single law? The Law of One. During the space-time of the Egyptian learning, when the Egyptians were learning from the Law of One, Ra worked to bring the mind complex, the body complex and the spirit complex, into an initiated state in which the entity could contact intelligent energy and so become learned itself, that healing and the fruits of study could be offered to all. So in essence, they, just like what they did with the pyramids, they decided to give an information about the tarot. Well, the tarot is just, it's a byproduct of the study of the archetypical mind. Let's put it that way. You see, that's why there are different ways to study the archetypical mind. And they suggested 3 ways, which are Western, of course, to who else? Western people, Don, Carla, and Jim. Now, the initiated state in which the entity could contact intelligent energy, that was the point. The point was to bring them to an initiated state in which they could begin to contact intelligent energy through contact with intelligent infinity, of course, which is not mentioned here, but we know that already. And so become learner themselves, so that healing and the fruits of study can be offered to all. That was their intention, that everybody could. It was like spreading, like it was supposed to spread out as some people studied the archetypical mind, became initiated, and all that jazz. So that was the intention. What else did they say? Very important part. The study of the roots of mind is a portion of the vivification of the mind complex, and, as we have noted, the thorough study of the portion of the roots of mind called archetypical is an interesting and necessary portion of the process as a whole. So the study of the roots of mind is a portion of the vivification of the mind complex. You see, here's a breakdown, right? If you can read this paragraph with the breakdown of what Ra has been saying, how do they started this whole answer? First, they said, we are humble messengers of the Law of One. We only wish to speak about the one law. We want to teach this one law. We basically want to tell everybody, you are one. Okay? But saying you're one, we know it doesn't work, especially to humans, right? Because we don't see it. So we need to go through this process of understanding how we are one, how everything is one, right? This is one of the ways, right? That's what they tried to do in Egypt. Now, how does this help? Well, the study of the roots of mind, right? Studying the roots of mind. What are the roots of the mind? This is the logoic mind. This is part of the roots. It's not the whole mind, but it's part of the roots. See, the study of the archetypical mind is only limited to humans, or at least here in planet Earth. We cannot study, say, We cannot understand the unity, say, through we could. Maybe. If we understand unity through this, then yes, of course. Okay, let me not get there. too complex for now. The study of the roots of mind is a portion of the vivification of the mind complex. So studying the roots of mind, which we'll get to with the archetypes right now. Just the study of the roots of mind is a portion of the vivification, I love that word, of the mind complex. And as they have noted, the thorough study of the portion of the roots of mind called archetypical. See, in the roots of the mind, there is a portion which we call archetypical, the blueprint of reality as humans, is an interesting and necessary portion of the process as a whole, which is the process of studying the roots of mind. So, again, the study of the roots of mind is a portion of the vivification of the mind. It is not the whole vivification of the mind, but is a portion. And that study, right? For that study, it is necessary to study the archetypical mind. So I wanted to make you visualize this, to see that the studying the roots of the mind is a portion, as Ross says, of the enlivening, right? Is that how it's pronounced? Bringing life to the mind complex and seeing it and say, yes, right? It is a portion. It is not the way in which to vivify the mind. So, and then if you want to go there to that study, then the thorough study requires the study of the archetypical mind as a whole. All right, let's move on to question 9. Don says, is there, in Ra's opinion, any present-day value for the reuse of the tarot as an aid in the evolutionary process? Ra says, we shall repeat information. It is appropriate to study one form of constructed and organized distortion of the archetypical mind in depth in order to arrive at the position of being able to become and to experience archetypes at will. You have 3 basic choices. You may choose astrology, the 12 signs, as you call these portions of the planet's energy web, and what has been called the 10 planets. You may choose the tarot with its 22 so-called major arcana. You may choose, did I say chose before? You may choose the study of the so-called tree of life with its 10 sephiroth and the 22 relationships between the stations. Let me just finish reading this. It is well to investigate each discipline, not as a dilettante, but as one who seeks the touchstone, one who wishes to feel the pull of the magnet. One of these studies will be more attractive to the seeker. Let the seeker then investigate the archetypical mind using basically one of these 3 disciplines. After a period of study, the discipline mastered sufficiently, the seeker may then complete the more important step. That is, the moving beyond the written in order to express in a unique fashion its understanding, if you may again pardon the noun, of the archetypical mind. Very well. Okay, so let's get into this. So, is there any value to the reuse of the tarot as an aid in evolutionary process? Well, let's start with when Ra says it is appropriate to study one form of constructed and organized distortion of the archetypical mind in depth in order to arrive at the position of being able to become and to experience archetypes at will. So, if you want to being able to become and experience archetypes at will, then it's important for you to study the archetypical mind. Now, which way? It is appropriate to study one form of constructed and organized distortion of this type of study of the archetypical mind. Now, Ra suggests 3. You have 3 basic choices. Emphasis on basic choices. How about that? You may choose astrology, right? We know the 12 signs and the planets and all of this stuff, it's a beautiful study too. It's 10 planets. If you're wondering, well, wait a minute, Gabe, we only have 8 because science says that Pluto is not a planet. Well, that's an arbitrary decision. And then you say, oh, 10 planets, planet X, planet where, I don't know, what do they call it? It's not Tiamat, that's another word for Maldek, I think, but whatever, where the Anunnaki came and all this stuff. That's the 10th planet. No, in astrology, the 10th planet is the moon, as far as I understand it. I don't know much about astrology, but I think the moon is considered a planet because of its influence. In the end, there is just mass and influence, right? So even Sirius, for example, or Deimos, these are, or Phobos, right? The satellites of Mars, which are asteroids, they're still mass. They have an influence. In any case, that study, if it's for you, and you can go there and study the archetypical mind. You can also use the tarot, which is what they chose here in the LL research group. You may choose the study of the so-called Tree of Life, which is the Kabbalah, right? The Judaism mystical tradition, and the 22 relationships between the stations and the 10 Sephiroth. Funny, right? There's 12 signs, 10 planets, that's 22. Then there's 22 tarot cards, and then there's 22 relationships between the stations and the 10 Sephiroth. I don't know much about it. Again, I remember reading this a while ago, and I said, I just felt it in my being that no interest. I read it and I said, well, I'm gonna miss something important here because I'm not interested. It doesn't move. It's like, I don't know, dancing. Some people are not, everybody dances, but really dance. Some people are not called for that. That was me. Although I like dancing, but not dancing professionally or anything. Why am I moving this way? I'm so used to going to the next slide. Right, okay, so you have those 3. Now Ra says, it is well to investigate each discipline, not as a dilettante, which means not as just, tiptoeing your way here and there, but truly go into it, right? Just go with it. Ra says, but as one who seeks the touchstone, one who wishes to feel the pull of the magnet. Yes, you must be attracted to this. Don't do it as a dilettante or just a jack of all trades, right? Master of none. One of these studies will be more attractive to the seeker. Well, I actually have a friend who is fascinated with both astrology and tarot, so I don't know. she's a special being. Let the seeker then investigate the archetypical mind using basically one of these 3 disciplines. So, okay, thank you, Ra. And then finally, after a period of study, the discipline mastered sufficiently, whatever it is, the seeker may then complete the more important step. Well, what is that step? That is the moving beyond the written, right? All the study and this and that, in order to express in a unique fashion its understanding, sorry for the word again, of the archetypical mind. So express this unique fashion of the archetypical mind. That's the most important step. So again, that to me sounds like a sort of service that people provide with their understanding of the archetypical mind. That's not my service. That's not my interest of being a service. And I move beyond that because I'm interested in that which is the most essential thing. Right? I think it works for me. It simply worked for me to go beyond all of this and to the essence of reality, which is the self. That to me is what's it. I don't mean at all to sound in any way superior or anything, but mostly to say that molecules depend their form due to atoms. Atoms are preceding molecules. So they are fundamental to molecules, right? But then you say fundamental particles are also needed for the atoms, so they precede the atoms. So what is it that precedes everything? And is that important? Well, of course it is. It is the most important thing, and it permeates everything. So that's what I'm interested in, that particular part. What is at the end? Is there something that we can say that is preceded by something else? We do know it. That's awareness. And how do we incarnate awareness here? That to me goes over anything else. The reason being is that for humans to live in harmony and peace, there is no need for archetypical mind studies at all. And I think that's why Ross says, if you want to experience and become archetypes at will, then by all means, that is your way to study it, the archetypical mind, through one of these. But I'm saying it's not important. Also, like, it's not, I would even say, it's not even important to know yourself into a specific study. None of that. Some people don't need any studies at all. They're just naturally harmonious and happy. That person doesn't need archetypical mind, doesn't need non-duality, doesn't need anything. A person is well and good, doesn't need to be touched. Leave them alone. You see, it's only when there is suffering. That's ignorance. And the ignorance is of who you are. And the archetypical mind does help you there. So anyhow, I'm going to cover one more question and then we'll call it a day for this first part. Don says in question 10, would I be correct in saying that our local son, I was going to say it's the same thing, logos, in acting as co-creator, distorted to some extent for the purposes of experience that which we experience here, and that the archetypes of this particular logos are somewhat unique with respect to the rest of the creation, but are, of course, related to the all in that they are part of it, but are, I can only say, a unique part, and that the systems of study that we have just talked about would not translate quickly or easily in other parts of the creation. This is a very difficult question to state and to read as well. Could you clear that up for me? Yeah, and Ross says, we may draw from the welter of statement which you offer the question we believe you ask. What a confused and muddled way to ask it. But I understand it. I think it's fine. Please re-question if we have mistaken your query. The archetypical mind is that mind which is peculiar to the logos under which influence you are at this space-time, distorting your experiences. There is no other logos, the archetypical mind of which you would be the same. Did I read that right? There is no other logos, the archetypical mind of which you would be the same, Okay. Any more than the stars would appear the same from another planet in another galaxy. Wow, that's a beautiful perspective. Yes, it's true. You may correctly infer that the closer logoi are indeed closer in archetypes. Wow. This actually puts a lot of perspective. It's a beautiful way to end this. There is more talk about the archetypical mind in this session, but I'll finish with this. You see, let me untangle everything that we just read, because I know it was all. I mean, get used to this. This is going to be the theme of book 4. So I'll do my best to be your guide in this. So what's happening here? All right. Don simply saying, and it's very accurate. It's true what Don is surmising here. He's saying, is it correct that the archetypical mind that we have here on planet Earth is very unique to the logos, right? If I go to another star or another planet, it would be different because, the archetypical mind must be different there. That's all that Don is asking. If you want to know, it's all so confusing, of course, but that's what Don basically asked. And Ross says, that yes, the archetypical mind is that mind which is peculiar to the logos under which influence you are at this space-time, distorting your experiences. So basically, yes, the archetypical mind is from the sun for the planet, or planet Earth. It's the same archetypical mind that Ra developed in Venus, Martians, Maldekians, and so on. The same archetypical mind, only with different gradations, of course, depending on the planet. And I loved when they say, well, this part is confusing to me. There is no other logos, the archetypical mind of which would be the same. Yeah, there is no other star that has the same archetypical mind. We know that. I think at this point you've gotten this far. You know how the distribution of archetypical mind is, which is different experience on every star, every planet, everything. And I love the analogy where they say it wouldn't be any different as the stars would appear from other planets in another galaxy. Oh, one term that is very misleading here is galaxy. I mean, it works too from another galaxy, but just remember that Ra calls galaxies also the star systems. So it's a little bit more appropriate for our regional galaxy to think of this analogy as if you were to go to Sirius, or to go to Alpha Centauri, or to, I don't know, Betelgeuse, any other star in our galaxy. The stars would look different, of course. If you move from the mountain down to the valley, then, the horizon would look different, of course. So wherever you move, it's the same horizon, or the same place, cathedral, whatever it is, at some place. Whatever you see from the vantage point is going to change. And so it is the same with the archetypical mind. And you may correctly infer, I think this is the beautiful part too. You may correctly infer that the closer logoi are indeed closer in archetypes. So similar archetypes, archetypical minds in, say for example, Alpha Centauri. I don't know if Alpha Centauri has life, third density, say. But if they did, then they would be very, very similar to us, because they're the closest. Proxima Centauri actually would be the closest, to be more precise. But yeah, so this is all I got for this first part of session 76. Conclusions. Just to reiterate that we're getting into the beginning stages of studying the raw approach to the archetypical mind. I'll emphasize the same thing I said before. It is not fully necessary that you study the archetypical mind. It's fascinating. It's interesting. When I say fascinating, I just don't say it, I'm not saying it in lip service, right? I am saying it because it is fascinating to know how the matrix, what we call the matrix in the tarot, is this that you're experiencing, right? Well, everything is combined. It's all one thing. It's not, you can't study them. That's why Ra suggests that you study them in pairs and in rows and all this stuff. And that's why somehow it's interesting. I'll just say something personal here. To me, it's really interesting that I'm not at all seduced by the study of the archetypical mind in depth, because I do love structure. I am one of structure. But in this case, I just don't feel called for it. I feel that there is a pure way for me, because my interest is really in harmony. You see, in bringing love, joy, happiness through the most efficient possible way. Maybe because this is not something that I don't see this happening in our era at all. And I don't mean to sound negative here, in the sense of, I'm not a positive positive thinking. No, I don't mean to sound that way, but to study the archetypical minds, maybe in the future, maybe these are the stepping stones, and those people that study it are leaving the foundation for other generations to use this. I just don't see it bringing joy and happiness to people on an immediate investigation. You see, I think we need, just think about it this way. For you to study the archetypical mind with Ra, you had to learn everything that Ra has said so far. I mean, you're going to have to apply knowledge about service to others, service to self, graduation, or not even graduation, but the process of evolution. You have to understand so many things, energy centers to a degree. There are so many things that you need to know, to understand, or to read and study the Tarot here. So imagine how this is going to be for the rest of the world. I don't see it. Maybe that's why I'm not interested. But again, I don't want my words to discourage anybody to get into the study of the Tarot. It's only that we don't have many resources. That's the truth. And I'm sad to say that I can't provide it. I will just give you a taste of what I know. And what I know is very little. But again, my purpose is to point at that which is the simple way, the most efficient way. And I mentioned it, sort of alluded it in here in this video when I talked about enlightenment being something that is taboo to say. Well, I find that is a limitation for people who are really interested in what enlightenment is, but they still have this stigma of an enlightened person, me? Oh, no, that's the ego talking, you see? And that's okay. That stigma of becoming enlightened is a very strong sign of the ego. So if you can ignore the ego that tells you, an enlightened person? No way, you can't be. True. You know, it really is a double-edged sword, for the ego, because it is an interesting part, but at the same time it's annihilation. So that's what I'm interested in. What truly is enlightenment? And if we take that word away, because it's just it's been prostituted so much, and we substitute it with self-realization. Know who you are. Doesn't sound too heavy on your shoulders. And I guarantee you it's the same thing, but sounds a little lighter. So, to know who you are, self-realization, that's what it means, to know who you are. Can we do that? Of course we can. And what are the implications of knowing who you are, of realizing who you are? Well, that I cannot describe, because then I will be putting like in Zen say, you're putting legs on a snake. I won't do that. But it is completely possible, and you can do it now. You don't need any prerequisites, no previous studies or anything. And that's what I'm interested. So the rest of this material, of course, is going to be impregnated with this essence, which is, to me, self-realization. Knowing of who you are, which is one, just the oneness of everything. Consciousness, awareness, the creator, whatever you want to call it. You. That's you. But for now, I come to the end of this video. Next time, I'm going to cover the rest of this session. Be definitely in 2 parts. We're going to talk more about the Tarot and the archetypical mind. Until then, I thank you for being part of book 3 till the end, and beginning now book 4. A long year to come with this last book, 30 sessions left, and I appreciate you being here. So with that, thank you again, and I'll see you in the next video.